I'd like to call a joint special school building committee to order. It's Thursday, September 27th, 2018. We're in the Nashua High School North Lecture Hall. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Dowd,
Present.
Alderman McCarthy,
Present.
Alderwoman Melitza Goya. Alderman Jett is not in attendance. Alderman Klee. Mrs. Oden.
Here.
Mr. Guarino is here. Ms. Raymond.
Here.
And Mr. Mosher will not be joining us tonight.
Okay, Alderman Klee and Alderman Jetty both told me they could not make it to tonight's meeting.
Okay, thank you. We also have Ms. Porter with us.
Thank you. Here.
Ms. Porter is a member of the joint special.
Yes.
Okay, we have to add you in.
Okay. I did go by the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, so if the clerk would lead us in the prayer, and then Mrs. Oden, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Almighty God, we have the high honor and serious duty to manage the educational affairs of our beloved city. Fill us, O God, with the spirit of unity and understanding, which enables us to face our multiple problems with a serene mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will always be for the betterment and greater happiness of our fellow citizens. So help us, God. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So we have a quorum. The minutes of the previous meeting, Alderman McCarthy.
Move that the minutes of the Joint Special School Building Committee meeting held Thursday, August 23rd, 2018 be accepted, placed on file, and the reading be suspended.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to accept the minutes of the previous meeting on Thursday, August 23rd, 2018, and waive the reading and place them on file. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Remarks by chairman. Thank you all for coming out. We have a few things to cover tonight, and I think we may be getting vision into the fact of upcoming meetings being a little more involved as we move towards the middle school construction project. So we'll be talking about that at some point this evening. Remarks by school administration. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, just please note that I gave you a revision to the financial sheet for the Fairgrounds Middle School roofing project, and that is because we looked a little more closely at the invoice that was provided, application number 5, which, so both of those sheets are different than the packet that you received earlier this week.
Okay. We can skip the construction projects committee report since we went right to the joint special. Items for discussion and approval, invoices. Alderman McCarthy.
Move to approve payment to A&M Roofing Services, LLC in the amount of $313,238.82.
Okay. The motion on the floor is to authorize the payment of invoice 16127 to A&M Roofing Services, LLC in the amount of $313,238.82. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Alderman McCarthy?
That's all we got. So for a middle school construction discussion.
Okay. Does that cover both?
That was both invoices, right?
Oh, okay. That's the total of both. All right, so it also includes invoice 16141. Okay, next subject is the middle school construction project. Smith?
Yeah, just to report, we had a tour of Elm Street Middle School on the 14th, and we had 10 architectural firms show up, 3 construction managers show up. Those are 2 separate sessions. Had some other ancillary firms show up, Foley and Buell, who's strictly a structural engineer, they show up as well. I've since received interest via email and phone of several other firms. So it sounds like we have a lot of interest in the project. The RFPs, the bid responses are due this coming week on Wednesday and Thursday for the architect and construction manager respectively. So I'll then we'll develop a plan on how to go through those and then present some recommendations to this committee. We'll most likely look at them and determine, first of all, if they're qualified and try to rank them based on their qualifications and references, and then bring our recommendation to you for the top 3 firms, if that sounds reasonable to everybody.
Okay, so when those come in, who's going to open them? 2 of you together? Okay. And
One of
then,
them holds the envelope and the other one tears it out.
and then you were going to summarize those on some kind of a sheet, and we can discuss the process going forward?
Correct.
And just for the record, and we're anticipating an award date when?
That depends on the process. So if we're providing a listing of all the people that responded to you at our next meeting, then probably I would hope get some sense from you on who you actually want to interview, if that's the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the interviews would take place in the November meeting. And if we make a decision, so by the end of the calendar year, we'd have somebody selected and could enter into negotiations. So around the beginning of the year, give or take, I would think we'd have an architect and a construction manager firm on board.
Okay, so when we talk to each one of these firms, I'm assuming that we'll get a flavor for how they're responding to the RFP, because it's, I'm assuming they can be taking different approaches.
Well, they have to respond to very specific questions that we put in the RFP.
Okay.
They have to provide their qualifications, what sort of work they've done on similar school projects or similar institutional type projects, would be colleges, that sort of thing. So that's a very key thing. We want to know, make sure the scope is of a similar size, 60 million plus, and listing the jobs they've done previously and then references. I did amend the RFP to include the possibility of an OSIP program for the construction manager. So one of the questions I asked was, what's your experience in working in that sort of environment? For everybody's benefit, OSIP is owner-controlled insurance program, which we talked about at our last meeting. And then we're looking at the fees. What sort of percentage do they anticipate charging us?
Mm-hmm. Very important. Any other questions? Well,
Alderwoman
Alderman-
Melissy
Alderwoman.
Golia.
I almost said alderman, Alderwoman Lizzie Golia. I know that
Tough, isn't it?
you have, I know, you have the same problem.
I don't even have my name tag here in front of me. So, Mr. Smith, just so I have the timeline correct, you and Mr. Donovan will be opening the responses, and then you'll go through those and summarize them and present the list to us for us to review, and then we will go through and select those companies we wish to interview for our November meeting.
Yeah, I think if you want, we will provide a prioritized list of who we think is
Okay.
most qualified, if that's what you're looking for.
Okay.
Might help to guide the discussion a little bit if we've already gone through them.
Okay, all right, that's fine, thank you. So it's November that we're looking for interviews, and then, so by the end of the year, we should have a sense of where we're going.
Correct.
So
Thank you.
is it your intent to rank them?
I
Or just do qualified,
I
unqualified?
could do it either way, whatever your pleasure is. We could rank them based on what we think, how they perform in the qualifications, or we just list them alphabetically and you can make your own determination.
Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, I would suggest we get some recommendations, but that we interview everybody who we deem to be qualified. I also want to ask that we arrange that so that the construction manager and architect interviews are separated, since I suspect I will have to recuse myself from the architectural selection.
Yes, Mr. Smith.
Given the number of architectural firms that have expressed interest so far, you may be looking at some number around 10. If we do, say, half an hour per interview, which can be challenging to get all the information out of them in that amount of time, do you want to do this over a couple of meetings, set up some special meetings, or how would you like to proceed with that? Construction managers are probably a night for themselves.
How many copies did they submit? Did we ask for 10?
10 architects so far and 3 construction
No.
managers.
How many copies of their response?
How many will they send in? I'd have to go back and look. I'll make
In
sure
other
there's at
words-
least enough for everybody here.
Yeah, so we have enough for everybody to look at them. Perhaps we could get those ahead of time and have a chance to look them over before we do the interviews, so.
Did we ask them to submit electronically?
Yes, I did, yes.
Okay.
Oh, good. Does anybody have a problem with getting it electronically rather than coming up with a collection of books that's about that high? I see no, so. And if you want to print it on your own printer, go ahead and give it a shot, but if you really want a hard copy, we did get extra copies from the people, so you could get them, and we may bring those to the actual interview, but at least give you an opportunity to look ahead and maybe ask questions about, because the scope of the project is pretty large, so. Any other questions of Mr. Smith? Alderwoman Melissa Golia.
If I could just ask, I think some of us have looked at these and been involved in some of this more than others. It might be helpful when you send what you have electronically to also send the RFP that went out, so people can look at, this is what was asked for and this is what we got, just so it's kind of a nice little package.
Do you think we should put them on the list of names of respondents on the Board of Ed website or our website? Or?
Yeah. I know we should probably publish all of it.
Yeah, so all the people that respond, we want to put that list on, probably put it on both the Board of Ed and the Board of Aldermen's website, city website. These are the firms that responded in no particular order, and then until we go through the interview process. Just so the general public has an idea of who responded and how many responded. Any other questions?
And maybe alphabetical order would be the safest thing to do.
Yes, I was assuming that, and I should have said it.
Well, you said no particular order, so I just, yeah.
I was trying not to get into preferences.
Right, right.
But yes, probably alphabetically is the way to go. And when you set up the interviews, we probably should get an opinion from the school department as to whether we think they're qualified or not qualified, and if they're not qualified, why? And if they're not qualified, we probably don't want to interview them. I don't know. What do you?
So that sounds like Dan's and my task to do that piece. so-
Right.
Yeah, so,
I guess, I mean, my suggestion would be you get those recommendations and then the committee vote on which architects to interview, because I mean, it makes no sense to do 10 interviews if we suspect 5 of them will not be considered for the contract.
right. Any input from the school board? No. So as the process goes forward, we'll go through the interview process. We'll determine the different companies and their approaches to the project, see which one settles best with this committee. And then we'll begin, once we do a selection of a particular architect firm and construction firm, then we'll start having meetings to sort of give them some guidance as they move forward. And typically on these types of projects, then we'll have continuing meetings where they'll come in, they'll show us, hey, this is what we want to do, this is what we're thinking. We went through, I don't know if anybody was here for the Broad Street project, we went through several of different iterations of how the school would look. Actually, I think we probably came out pretty well on that one. So, I'm sure we'll have lots of questions on cost. Yes?
Is there some sort of a rubric that we use to evaluate? Is there, so this is the first time I've done this, so when I'm reading all of these proposals, is there a scorecard of some sort that or some sort of a sheet that would guide me through that?
I think that's what Alderwoman Lizzie-Goley was referring to. The three of us have been through a number of them.
Right, okay.
I think what Mrs. Porter is asking for, though, is what I suggested was the RFP. So we could say, this is what we asked for, this is what we got. I think you're going the next step, which is how do I then kind of rank each piece, each response, which I think is what Mr. Donovan and Mr. Smith are going to do. And my sense is they will then give us their rankings and how they got to their determination of why people were ranked more highly.
I'll take a cut at things you probably ought to look at, and I'll run it by Sean and Brian and maybe Mary Ann if she has time. And, come up with, okay, these are the kind of things you want to look at. Obviously, cost is pretty high, but particularly from the Board of Education standpoint, what are they going to do to Pennachuck, Elm Street, and Fairgrounds, and possibly if it's a new school? What are the different approaches? What are the different costs? The other thing you're going to want to look at, and although we'll get into more of this, but you want to look at, what kind of work have they done before? If they ever done any work for us, if they ever done any work in New Hampshire, New England, and you look at the types of things they've been successful at, and then you learn a lot more when we go through the interview process.
Could I just?
Alderman McCarthy.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Every time we do this, it comes out a little differently. And I think if you look at the last 5 projects we've done, they've all been fairly straightforward. They didn't require much in the way of design that was unique to the project. We were mostly looking for people who could get all the drawings right on the first try and come out with something that could be bid at a reasonable cost. If we're looking at building a school from scratch, that's a much different problem, and the integration of the program into the building is important. So I would suggest that you look at 2 things. One is, what kind of experience do they have with building a building around a program and integrating the program into it, and 2, what's the team like to work with in the dynamics, and to a lot of extent that turns out to be really important. If you get a team that just doesn't want to consider change when we have differing opinions than their first idea, that becomes a problem. If they're not energetic, that becomes a problem. So I would urge you, like I said, I probably won't be participating, but those are the things I always look at is how's the relationship going to work, and what's their base talent to get us the best possible product.
And may I just,
Alderwoman Lizzie-Goley?
I wanted you to say it again, that's why I waited. I think Alderman McCarthy's first point about building around a program, not making a program fit the space we build, is really important. I think a number of us have worked in schools, and and the rest of us have talked to people who have said, oh, if they had designed it this way, or the services we give now are so different from what was provided when this building was built 100 years ago. So I think that's really important that you look at what kind of programs are we delivering, what kinds of spaces do we need, and do they provide those options for growth and change, and meeting our needs. So I think that's major in looking at what we do.
So some of the things that you're going to be looking at are, each school's a little unique. Pennachuck, we want to get rid of the portables, and which probably could entertain, depending on what they come back with, a new wing. And if it is, what do you want to put in it? How many classrooms? How big? Where? You know, there's a lot of questions like that. On Elm Street, it's going to be a question of, can you renovate it? And if you do renovate it, what's it cost? And how does that compare with building a new school down south? South End, not. And, and then fairgrounds may have their own set of unique, and if we want to balance, if we do end up building a new school, and that's yet to be determined, you know, we said we want to balance the three schools at about 800 students. So I can't even remember off the top of my head how many they have at fairgrounds, but I don't think it's 800. So all that's going to be hopefully in these proposals. Alderwoman Melizzi Golia.
I would just have a request. I'm looking at this timeline, and I was listening to Mr. Smith talk about maybe having 2 nights for the interviews with the architects. Is that what you were, did I hear you correctly?
I did suggest that, but as after the fact, I thought maybe that's premature until we see who actually sends in a request or
How many
a bid response.
What is the deadline? I forgot.
This coming Wednesday and Thursday.
Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, so like exactly a week. Okay. I'm just wondering if we don't want to at least, not at this meeting, because that would be a disaster trying to put calendars together, but at least throw some dates out there once you get responses, so people can hold some dates, maybe in November, because we're going to be running into vacations and the holiday and, you know, just all sorts of other things people are involved in as we get into November and December. So I'm feeling like we should look at some dates between our October and November meeting. And if we save our November meeting for the construction interviews, maybe try to do the architectural interviews prior to that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So let's see how many responses we get, and then see if we want to set up a intermediate meeting before November's meeting, or have 2 November meetings. Well, we could do another one. We got a meeting in October, so. But see what we think you need to do. You and I can talk about, you know, what we can accomplish in one night. Certainly not 10 interviews if we have 10 viable customers. They all take at least an hour, don't you think? So.
Yeah, Sean was talking about a half an hour being tight, so, yeah. And I mean, in November, we've got election day.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some things that are going to be taking up school space, and
I know the board of ed's used to 10-hour meetings, but. But not on the old.
the endurance.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
2 things. One, I can tell you that of those that express interest, they include every single architect we've employed for school construction jobs back to the 1980s even. So
That must
you
mean
can,
we're really good to work with.
they keep coming back, yes.
They never bid for the next job, but they always come back for the one after that.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of the companies that we worked with before know how much of a stickler we are on
Right.
meeting requirements and costs and all that other stuff. Mr. Smith?
The other thing is, I was still a newbie at the time when we were embarking on the high school project. Alderman McCarthy was there for sure, and maybe some of the others. And what the school district did at that point was they took a hard look at the high school programs, every single department. And then those departments, put together their wish lists and then met with the architect, and then there has to be some give and take because they, of course, want everything, and money will provide so much. So I don't know if we're planning to do something like that with a middle school program. It seems almost,
I think we mentioned at one of the previous meetings that when we get going in this, we probably want to have some discussion with the 3 middle school principals as to what their deficiencies are, what they'd like to see again. They're not going to get everything they want probably, but, certainly the construction manager and the architect ought to be here for that. Whatever guidance we can give the people we hire is going to be huge. And of course, I think the superintendent ought to be involved as well.
I think the programmatic part is actually the purview of the superintendent and the Board of Education, and not necessarily the construction committee.
so I
But I
was
think
kind of looking over there.
it would make sense to get a sort of, some sort of written statement of what that is, so that we can understand that as we do the design.
Mrs. Oden?
Yes, I will say, Dr. Mosley started his career as a special ed teacher, and he has been looking at special ed programs in space, and he said that's definitely one thing, should we build a new school, that has to be looked at, because special ed programs and the students in there need more space than they ever did before. So he absolutely has some idea about what needs they have to have for programs. Plus he has the experience of building a high school down, I believe, in Somerset. In one of his previous positions, he was in charge of the high school, and they brought in a tremendous amount of technology at that point. So I think he would be very involved in, and want to be involved in
Yeah,
planning of the new, if there is a new school or even
Particularly if there's a new
renovations.
school. Yeah. And if you get into a new school, and we were involved in the 2 high schools, you even have a night dedicated to colors,
Well, that sounds like
or more than one night, as I recall. I remember that the person that came and presented, the architect, and said, "Do we really have to have purple in the South School?" We all looked at each other and said, "Yes." That would be worse than redistricting and trying to change the color of Nashua High. But anyway, so anything else, Mr. Smith?
We kind of zipped past the Fairgrounds Middle School, so the roofing project is essentially done. We expect one more invoice from the A&M Roofing. They have a little bit of work left to do. There will be a slight increase in the project cost because they encountered a little more asbestos in the flashing and whatnot around the roof. But it will still be well within our contingency fund.
Okay, good. So also, I put in legislation that went through the first reading, the full board, and is going to my budget committee with about 6 other bonds one night. A $380,000 bond to cover some projects, and I'm going to let Mr. Smith describe what the projects are. Hope you remember.
So yes, there was paving at Amherst Street Elementary School. We just had issues crop up with the large chiller unit at this high school. The motor burned out. It's a very large motor, somewhere around 500 horsepower motor, which is very, very big. That's about 80 grand. Boy, you caught me flat-footed.
The 2 roofs that are leaking?
But the roofs, Lead Street, Bicentennial, and Amherst Street all have roofs that need not the entire roof, but just portions of the roofs.
And the emergency generators.
And, yes, so
For-
generators for.
Dr. Chris, wasn't it?
Dr. Chris and Bicentennial.
Bicentennial.
And the Dr. Chris one is a little more involved because there's an underground storage tank that has to be removed.
And
And
oil.
we're converting everything over to natural gas. I think those are them.
And
And so, from what I could tell, the alderman sent that resolution to the Board of Ed for consideration at their next meeting, just looking for consent that they want to proceed with those projects.
That's why I brought it up. So, if we get a negative, first of all, the items that were selected from a list that Mr. Smith gave me were all items that will last over 20 years, hopefully, although this motor should have lasted 20 years, actually 35, and it didn't, so I don't know. But, and by the way, that motor is about, if I recall, 2,900 pounds. It's huge. It's a big motor. And it takes quite a bit to get it in and out and transported, all that stuff. So, and the playground, hopefully will last 20 years. The playground at Amherst Street hasn't been done in a long time, and the pavement's failed. And the roofs, obviously, if they're leaking, we need to do something about that, rather than just a Band-Aid fix. And hopefully that will last 20 years. The two emergency generators are also been recommended by Justin Cates, who's the Emergency Preparedness Director for the City of Nashua, because the two schools we're talking about need the emergency generator because they're emergency shelters. So, and we probably would have liked to get them in before the winter, but I don't think that's going to happen.
No, the ones we have there, we have to work on, but we can limp them through at least another year. So
Yeah.
it's also a matter of getting rid of the underground storage tank.
So we just need a baptism from the Board of Ed on that to go forward. It's going to go to the Budget Committee. I can tell you now, if the Board of Ed shoots it down, it's not going to budget. It'll stop. Okay. Yes.
Sorry, I have a question on the Amherst Street. Is it the older part of the building or the newer part
The older
that
part.
needs a roof? Okay,
The front playground right off of
Amherst Street.
Hammer Street.
Okay, thank you.
Then the roof is the 1892 building, the front one, the oldest one.
Yeah. Yeah, so it hasn't been done, so it needs to be.
Is it an 1892 roof?
No, it isn't. Back then, it was a slate roof, and now we're shingled, but.
Made out of wood. Yes, Mr. Smith.
Actually, the Board of Ed saw most of these projects already. You may recall a number of months ago, maybe even the spring, we sent this to the alderman, to get these projects put together and funded in some way. Although the $80,000 thing for the chiller unit is brand new. But it's probably the highest priority at this point.
Yes, you probably ought to also add a bottle of Tums for the city treasurer, Yes, Mr. Greeno.
Yes, I believe you talking about a deferred capital improvements program, is that what you said when we saw some of these projects, or was that something different?
It was something, so after we went through, the whole budget season,
Yeah,
I talk with my hands sometimes.
yeah,
And we only had $100,000 for deferred maintenance.
Right.
We've had a number of projects that were still really needed to be done.
right, yeah, I remember that list.
And so, that
okay.
was provided to you, I want to say
Yep,
June or July.
yep, okay,
Mr. Smith sent me a list with about, I don't know, 10, 12 at least projects on it. I took a look at them with him and said, okay, which ones of these can last 20 years? That's the only way we can bond something if it's going to have a long life.
okay,
So there are, I think, 6 bonds that are going to be heard on October 22nd for various things. I think one's not too bad because it's a public health building, and I think there's some federal and state money in that, or I forget, but anyway, there's several of them that will have public hearings on that night. Any other business to come before the joint special? Any, let me see. There's no comments by members of the public. Comments by committee members? Alderwoman Melissa Golan.
To thank the members of the Board of Ed for appointing Ackerman as the assistant principal over at Bicentennial. I know the community there was very happy to have her back. Look forward to her leadership and being part of the team there, so thank you.
One down, and how many to go?
A few more.
I don't think there's any need for non-public. Do I have a motion? Alderman McCarthy.
Move to adjourn.
The motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned at 7:27.